America, you, the majority, do not believe our president to be honest and trustworthy. That's the numbers on the latest Gallup poll, and one can only believe those numbers have almost zero chance to improve based on what's happening in the American Southwest, certainly in Iraq. Our next guest has been hearing the American people talk back to him for 3+ decades over the radio waves. One of the more respected opinionators of things political and more. Currently the Morning Drive host on WWRL Radio in New York City. It is a pleasure to welcome Mark Riley into the show. Mark, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Mark, any real surprise whatsoever when we look at this new poll from Gallup that says that most Americans simply don't believe the phrase honest and trustworthy applies to President Obama?
This is nothing new. American presidents have long gone through the same thing. I would refer you to 2006, June 2006, which was George W. Bush's second year in office. His approval numbers during that time were 36, 38, and 37 during the three polls that were taken during the month of June. That's lower than Barack Obama's approval rating at this point. Not to say that Obama's approval rating is anything to write home about, but bottom line, these things happen. And by the way, Dick Cheney's approval rating during that same period was even much lower than Bush's.
Okay, but
so
let's
I don't know what people expect him to. What, is he going to resign or something?
Well, let's bring this, though, into the current range. And I realize, of course, that when you get down to presidents, look, presidents are never really universally loved by anybody. And, of course, you're right, a lot of these numbers are true. But shouldn't the American people expect more? Weren't we told to expect more, thought we would expect more? Because certainly the president has backed up just like every other politician on so many things, certainly in the last few months here, and that's part of the reason why people don't think he's trustworthy.
Well, I've always believed that the economy is what drives a presidential approval ratings. When people are comfortable with the economy, the president has a good approval rating. Or if you're in a situation like George H.W. Bush was at the beginning of the Iraq War, when he had a 91% approval rating. There are certain things that drive presidential approval numbers that are not necessarily based in exactly what's going on at the time. Now, that's not to say that the VA hasn't hurt him. That's not to say that the Iraq situation will not hurt him, because I believe the latest Gallup poll was taken before all this has started. So it's entirely possible that that's going to hurt him. But I wouldn't, place life or death stock in whether or not Barack Obama is going to act based on those approval numbers.
Okay, and I will point out exactly as you said, this poll was taken June 5th through the 8th, and it was 51% of Americans responding to the poll said they do not believe the phrase is honest and trustworthy applies to the president. You will, however, agree with me that the president has, just like every other politician, no matter whom it is, has backed up on some things, certainly when he said that we made the decision on Bo Bergdahl, and then it comes out that, well, he said Chuck Hagel made the decision, then Chuck Hagel says we all made the decision. Isn't it sort of those little tiny things that everybody grasps onto now, because we have a 24/7, 365 news cycle that grabs every single second, but it still makes people wonder where the truth is, somewhere in between all these words and changes?
Well, I mean, who made the decision on Bo Bergdahl is, to me, not the most important thing that this president has to deal with right now.
No, but it just goes to show from people
Chuck
where
Hagel
they hear one
said
thing.
We.
Well, yeah, what I'm saying is, though, the American people
Hagel
hears
said
one thing.
We too.
Right, but the White House said
Obama
before
didn't
that
say,
it was
I
that
made
was
the
his
decision alone.
Right. But what they're saying.
He said we.
But, however, the White House did come
and
out
as
and
far
say.
as I'm concerned, who made the decision? I thought it was the right decision. No matter who made it, I thought he made the right decision.
Okay. Well, I'm not going to, and you're right, it's all words back and forth between the White House and between Chuck Hagel and what goes on. So we all heard exactly what the president said and what the White House said on that. So it has to sit for what it is right now. Let me move forward with the poll, and let me ask you this. Regarding what we heard today on the president, certainly the Bergdahl situation is big, but regarding the statements that he made today, basically saying, the Iraq government, solve your problems, we won't put boots on the ground, we're going to look at it. Do you think the American people at this point actually believe him when he says we're going to do this and not do this?
Well, I think the American people believe him when he says we're not going to put boots on the ground, because I don't think the American people, and I'm no pollster, but I don't think the American people want boots on the ground. I don't think the American people want a boot in Iraq at this point. A very interesting article in the Wall Street Journal today that talked about the end game for these insurgents in Iraq. And it's not just Iraq, it's not just Syria. They want to create an Islamist state through a broad swath of the Middle East. What's going to be Barack Obama's challenge is whether or not that, if they have any way of getting toward it, whether that is against United States interests or not. What's going on now is awful as far as loss of civilian life. But if that's their end game, then Obama's going to have to deal with that end game and how America responds to it.
How should America respond then, in your opinion?
It's a difficult call. I don't think there should be boots on the ground. I really believe war is not the answer, to quote Marvin Gaye. But I think that at some point, the United States is going to have to confront the fact that these folks in the Middle East are responding to the fact that they had absolutely no say whatsoever in the way the lines, which are the national boundaries that were drawn, that exist to this day. That happened 100 and something years ago. And the fact is, they want to draw their own lines. And I can understand that. I don't agree with ISIS or any of the things they're talking about. I saw something from the Washington Post that talks about women have to stay indoors. I find that to be absurd. But I do understand how they might want to draw their own boundaries. The question is going to be, is the United States threatened from a security standpoint by all this that's going on?
Would you then gather, and I'm going to take right off that, threatened from a security standpoint for the United States, there are those who would say that, of course, we are threatened because this is a hotbed of terrorism. This is where terrorism breeds here. So we have to make sure that, and again, this is the opinion of many people out there, many pundits out there, said we have to clean it out and do whatever we can to make sure they don't have bases to operate from. Your response to that would be?
My response to that would be, don't pay attention to what all the pundits say, okay? The bottom line here is this. There are places all over the world that are hotbeds of terrorism. You certainly know about Nigeria and some of the other places, Boko Haram and other places in the world. What distinguishes the Middle East and separates it from any other place in the world is not hotbeds of terrorism, but hotbeds of oil. And if America's oil supply is interrupted, that's what people have a concern about.
So are we not right back where we were perhaps a decade or two ago, where at the end of the day, we heard this before. I know you certainly did on the radio. You talked about it. We all did. That this is all about oil at the end of the day?
It is largely about oil. I don't want to say all about anything, but it is largely about oil and America's oil supply. And the sad part of that is, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Tory, or Whig, America has had fair warning that our oil supply is not going to be inexhaustible. And we have not taken steps to wean ourselves off fossil fuels. That's an environmental issue, and that's one that nobody wants to talk about.
Okay, that's an environmental issue, you're right. So let's bring this back a little bit to the Gallup poll here. When you talk about fair warning here, it does seem obviously, certainly as the president spoke today, that even he intimated that we knew this was coming, we have seen this happening. It's not as if it happened just out of the blue. There's been fair warning that this is a country that is once again in complete turmoil. So I think the American people are wondering, and again, this comes down to trust, to be able to trust their government, to look at the signals and be able to see and read the tea leaves much sooner and be able to take action instead of waiting to a point where the government that we helped to build is almost completely in tatters. Wouldn't you say that also is a big part of that trust?
Well, I mean, yeah, it's a part of the trust, but the question is, what action? What action do people think the American government needs to take? Should we just go over there and start bombing people? Should we go out there and take out ISIS? That's not realistic. It's not possible. It's not even probable. The bottom line is, yeah, there has to be a policy formulated, but that's going to take a minute. Don't think that because this stuff started last week that any government, I don't care whether it's America, whether it's Cameron's Britain, wherever, that they can come up with some brilliant solution to dealing with what is essentially a battle between two different factions of the same religion.
Is it possible, though, that we simply cannot win that battle against those two religious factions, no matter what we do, how much time we spend, how much money we spend?
Depends on how we spend the money. If we're smart, if we place our, and by the way, the people that are involved in this insurgency are not broke, okay? They're getting money from somewhere under whatever circumstances. I have my own feelings, which I won't share with you, about where I think the money's coming from, but that's secondary. To what extent is America prepared to spend money intelligently to deal with this situation. That's going to be the bottom line here.
Spend money intelligently. I'm not sure that we can use those three words inside the Beltway and have them really mean much. I mean, but I'm with you.
I mean, look,
wish we could. I wish we could. Unfortunately, we're all out of time, Mark, but I tell you, we probably have to deal with that again. Mark, thanks so much for joining us today, my friend. We'll talk again.
All right, thank you.
All right, there is the poll. That is what people are saying. All right, here's the question to you now. Do you trust the president? Do you think he's honest and trustworthy? And what would you like to see to perhaps make him more honest and trustworthy for you? Answer us up on social media. We'll talk about it right here on Newsmax and right here on Midpoint. News for an intelligent audience.